Hey, Steve Saretsky here. As always, Canadian real estate market update with a particular focus on Vancouver. If you're getting sort of value entertainment out of these videos, all I ask you hit thumbs up and subscribe. Questions, comments, put those below. I did a video this past week on basically the video was titled "Why Housing Affordability Will Continue to Worsen in Canada." And a slew of data this past week actually only made that video more timely. It actually just perfectly touched on that video. And I kind of want to walk you through some of those data points and again reiterate sort of that view of that video that I did past week. So we have basically the sort of message in that video is that if you start to understand monetary policy in particular, you start to understand why I see affordability going where it's going. So for example, the central banks, particularly in Canada, the Bank of Canada's official mandate is a 2% inflation target. So they target an annual inflation rate of 2%. The problem is they use what's called CPI, Consumer Price Index, which is a horribly flawed metric. In fact, I think it's probably the biggest hoax in society today. So for example, the Bank of Canada over the past decade has actually undershot their official mandate of 2% annual inflation target. So they said that they've actually slightly missed their target. Now, if you ask anybody on the streets, they'll probably tell you that inflation's running significantly higher, particularly in these large metro cities like Vancouver and Toronto, where you have home prices and rents growing by double digits, and of course, food price inflation, etc. But just think about this again, the fact that you have a national inflation index where, if you really think about it logistically, you know, a 65-year-old retiree on a fixed pension in New Brunswick is going to have a much different rate of inflation than, say, a 30-year-old in the city of Vancouver, or, you know, a millennial in the city of Toronto is going to have a much different rate of inflation than somebody in their 50s or 60s or even 70s in, say, Alberta. So the fact that you can have varying rates, you can have one CPI basket for an entire nation, I think is number one, is your first problem. Inflation varies by age, demographic, and geography. So you cannot have a nationwide basket. And so the Bank of Canada continues to say, well, we're continuously missing our 2% inflation goals. And the data that came out this past week, so basically, okay, so you continue to miss your 2% inflation targets. That basically gives you the excuse now to hold rates at zero and to engage in quantitative easing, because we need these programs to basically allow us to hit our 2% inflation target. As if there's some real difference between, you know, a 1.7% inflation versus a 2% inflation. As if that 0.3 of a difference, it really makes any difference. It's just all this made up basket anyways. And so we have this data that comes out this past week that basically shows national home prices up 11.9% year over year. So during a recession, a significant job layoff, falling rents, we actually had the slowest, the weakest pace of population growth since 1946 this past quarter. So all those sort of economic fundamentals are falling at the wayside. Yet you have home prices up by 11.9% year over year, and they're actually accelerating right now. They're accelerating at a pace that's faster than 1% per month. And now, again, if you look at the housing data, everybody's talking about, you know, pent-up demand. Okay, it was just because, you know, people were not able to shop for housing in April and May, and so that pent-up demand. Well, you know, we're basically in December now, and if you actually look at the Canadian real estate data, is 2020, the year that we're currently in, is actually on pace to be the strongest number of home sales, the most amount of home sales ever on records, far surpassing. It will surpass. I can almost guarantee this. It will surpass the 2016 highs. Now, again, if anybody can remember the 2016 highs, we had immense speculation. We had a ton of foreign investment, foreign capital coming into the markets. There was a ton of froth, rampant home price appreciation, and everyone was calling it a housing bubble. So we fast forward to 2020, and again, during a economic recession, the likes of which most of us have never seen, and borders closed, so you have no population growth, and rents are falling. You have rampant price appreciation, record home sales. So again, and then the Bank of Canada is coming out and telling you that, per the recent data, that inflation once again missed, although it did shoot a little bit higher than expected on shelter, on rising shelter costs, to which they said shelter costs year over year are up 1.9%. So again, you can look at this metric and say, well, hold on a second. The Canadian resale home prices are up basically 12% year over year, yet your shelter costs in your index are saying they're only up 1.9%, which actually meant the whole CPI basket, I think, was around 1.7%. So they're still below their 2% in target, which again allows the Bank of Canada to continue on their merry way of keeping rates at zero and engaging in these massive quantitative easing programs. And this is the problem, because these programs, you're setting the price of money. So you're setting the price of money. So remember, an interest rate that's set by the Bank of Canada is just putting a price on money. So you're setting the price of money at 0.25% based off a misguided notion, based on a faulty metric of CPI to begin with. And so again, lo and behold, we had the Bank of Canada's Tiff Macklem, again, just so beautifully timed, coming out this past week and talking about his views on the Canadian housing market. Once again, telling us that there's nothing to worry about. There is no froth.
When it comes to the economic growth in Canada, the bank has spoken out before about household debt in Canada. It's among the highest in G7 countries. So there's a question there on Slido about what risk does this represent to Canadian economic growth?
Well, thank you for raising that. I mean, we have highlighted the risk of high household indebtedness and high housing prices, stretched housing prices. In Vancouver, you're particularly familiar with this. That risk has been there for some time. A number of measures were taken by governments, both provincial and federal, to better manage this risk. I'd highlight in particular OSFI's mortgage stress test, which I think has been effective, but that is one of a number of measures. As we've come into this crisis and the economy plunged into recession, we've obviously lowered interest rates very low. Our policy rate at the effective lower bound, quantitative easing, lowering the rates that households and companies borrow at. So if you're a household with a mortgage, you're now renewing that mortgage at a lower interest rate. That's making it more affordable and giving you more money to spend on something else, or pay it down faster. The other thing low interest rates are doing, together with considerable fiscal support, is that's supporting the recovery. And the best predictor of whether somebody's going to repay their mortgage is whether they have a job. It's critically important that we get Canadians back to work. That's going to make the debt that the household sector has more sustainable. The other thing I would mention is that one of the unusual features of this recession is that household saving has actually gone up a lot. And in our own projection, we expect, and what we're seeing actually, is that households are using that increase in savings to pay down debts. They're using it to invest. Some of it will likely get spent, and that's good. That'll support the recovery, but some of it will likely be used to pay down debt. So hopefully that risk is minimized. It's certainly something that we're watching. Housing markets have come back very strongly. Interestingly, the strength has been a little less focused than usual in Toronto and Vancouver, and it's been a little bit more spread across the country, which is a good thing. We're not seeing the kind of frothy housing markets that we saw in 2016, but it is certainly a risk that we will be watching closely.
So it's something that he is, quote, got his eyes on. There's no froth like there was in 2016. Again, I don't know if I have to reiterate that home prices are growing at a pace of greater than 1% per month during an economic hardship. Again, I don't need to reiterate all the jobs that have been lost, the pandemic, the shutdowns, the drop off in immigration. And so this is creating now this fear of missing out, this speculative feedback loop, because what happens is when I talk to my clients, there's this fear now that if home prices are growing by 1% per month in a pandemic, in a recession, when there's no population growth, when there's no real wage growth, what happens when you come out the other side? What happens when you have the vaccines widely distributed, you get people back to work, you open up the doors to this immigration, and Justin Trudeau, the Liberal government, has ramped up their immigration targets, which they hope to hit. That the fear is, well, what happens then? If they're growing at this pace then, if they don't go down during this time, when will they ever? And so you're creating these speculative feedback loops. And now, again, and so I don't think that, again, the rise in home prices or what people are doing right now during these times in the housing market, I almost feel like it's like the slow loss of the faith in the currency. Because again, the house prices aren't going up on fundamentals right now. They're going up almost on like a fear of the currency continuing to lose its value, of basically what governments and central bankers are doing. And I think I really do believe that those fears are justified, because what they're going to continue to do is they're going to continue to keep rates at zero, as they've said, until at least 2023. And they're going to continue these QE programs because it's impossible to back out of these QE programs once you start them. So again, the central bankers unfortunately have painted themselves into the corner, and the repercussions of such policies are that basically assets continue to go high. And we've seen, again, new highs this past week in Bitcoin, in real estate, in various sectors of the stock market. And so this is basically just a continued devaluation of the currency, which is basically what I've been talking about this entire time. So it's kind of my thoughts for this week. We'll probably have one more session here before the holidays. But if this video brought you any sort of value, entertainment, hit the thumbs up button, hit subscribe, and we'll see you next week.